Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here joining us today in the Hopkins Hour online seminar for today that is titled Taking the Confusion Out of Co-Design. Before we begin today, there we go. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting from today. Sorry, we're just having a little bit of problem with our... There we go. My bad. Let me start again. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands upon which we're all meeting from today. I am sitting in my office on the Griffith University Nathan campus, which is located in the beautiful Toohey Forest. And this is Turrbal and Yagara country. I would like to pay my respect to the elders past and present, and to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including those meeting with us here today. We're very excited to meet with you today and present to you today in this Hopkins Hour. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise Gustafsson and I am Program Lead of the Enabling Technology and Environment stream at the Hopkins Centre. And so I'm going to lead off with the first presentation. We've got two presentations then following that, and a wonderful panel joining us at the end with lots of opportunities for discussion and question and answer. Just a few housekeeping things before we begin. We know that the internet connection can often be a little bit challenging, and so if you do experience any challenges, please just put a question in the chat via the toolbar if it's still working, or reach out to the team who will help you the best that they can. Sometimes it's best just to leave and come back again, and that can often correct the issue for you. Equally, if you would like to use the closed captioning system that's available via Teams, just a reminder that that is available to you up on the top line underneath the more. You can hit on that and that will give you a chance to get the captioning, closed captioning happening for you. We really welcome any questions at any time throughout the event. So you can do this just by chatting your questions into the chat box. And certainly we will do our best to answer and include all the questions at the end of the presentations and the second part of this session today. But certainly if we don't have time, we will come back to them and respond to them after the event. If you don't have typing into the chat box available to you, then certainly when it's time, please feel free to raise your hand using the function up at the top box again, and we will then throw the spotlight to you and give you an opportunity to turn your mic on and ask your question. I'm really excited to introduce today's speakers. So Mike Norwood and Kelly Clanchy will be presenting for us today. And then we'll have panellists who are joining us at the end of the session, Hannah Simmons and Catherine Cave. So with that all out of the way, I am going to get started with the very first presentation of the day, which is I'm going to be presenting about a project that we've already talked about that was supported by NISQ, a project that we ran a couple of years ago, the Growing AT Solutions for Queensland project. But I'm actually going to talk about how we worked with consumers and community and how we use participatory approaches throughout that, through the very many stages of that project. So I'm just going to introduce that before throwing to Mike for his presentation. In the spirit of the presentation for today, I would also like to acknowledge the lived and living experience of people with disability and recognise the important role that they play in shaping education, research, services and policy. Each person's journey is unique and a valid contribution. We respect and honour their resilience and strength in sharing their stories and their expertise with us to improve the lives of people living with disability in our communities and to achieve inclusion, empowerment and rights for all. I am an academic, so it does mean there's a bit of lag going on with me changing. Thank you. The slides. So I'm going to give us a bit of a history lesson. I became very interested recently in where was the origin of the word co-design. So I had to read a lot of things, and I found my way back to the 1940s with this fellow here, Levin, who really believed in social equity and people being not the object of investigations, but rather empowered and involved in investigations. And Levin was the first person to introduce the term of action cycles. So these cycles that you can see under there that were really the forerunner to what we now consider as participatory action research. So some of us might be familiar with this, is the idea that consumers, community, and the organisations or the researchers are really working together to define the problem, understand the problem, devise a solution, observe what happens, reflect on that, and keep refining. So this is really participatory action research at the core in terms of equal partnerships and working together to solve those issues. Following on from him, we had, sorry, I'm opening all sorts of things here today. Technology is not working in my favour today. We found a gentleman, I found some very austere photographs when I was doing this, a gentleman called Freire, who was actually an educator, and he was from Brazil, and he worked with people in Brazil who were very disenfranchised and very disadvantaged. And he really believed that, took an emancipatory approach in terms of believing that people who were living in this situation should be the ones that generate the solution. So same philosophy, that really we should not have people coming in to solve the issues for people. People should be part of that solution and deciding on what that should be. And I think this quote from him really quite aptly demonstrates that really if we do not involve people in generating the solution, then we are treating them as objects that must be saved from a burning building. So you can see here there's a real flavour in what we like to do here at Hopkins Centre, and certainly what we're talking about today, in that even though we as a team will have certain expertise, we bring that together with people that have the expertise in their experience to understand that experience and also identify the solutions. So how did these two approaches, the very much social justice, emancipatory action research type approach, become what we see today as co-design? Well, in around the 70s, there were a group in Scandinavia who were involved in computer design, and they started to talk about participatory cooperative design. And again, taking very much that social justice, that emancipatory approach, they said that the workers who have to use these computer systems that we're designing should be part of the design team, and they should be informing that and helping us make the decisions. So it really was about starting to bring in what we know as design thinking or user-centered design in whatever form they were using then into this kind of democratic emancipatory action research approach to form what was termed then as participatory cooperative design. And this is what jumped across into the healthcare system. King's College in the UK picked this up and started to talk about experience-based co-design as the way that we should be developing our healthcare systems and our healthcare services. And for us here in Australia, that is represented by the experience-based co-design toolkit that's readily available to us, and some of you might recognise this image. One of the things that we talk a lot about as a team is that it is fantastic to have any of these processes or steps laid out for us in terms of knowing how to do this work. But what we often worry about is what happens with those principles that I was talking about before in terms of people being equally involved, power sharing, and who's involved in what stages. So really today, from what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about how we did that AT Solutions project, but certainly the ways that we made sure that we were staying true to participatory principles as we were doing that. And one of the frameworks that I use to help me think through this comes from the IAP so the International Association for Public Participation, and they talk about how we involve consumer and community at 5 different levels. So I'm going to do a very quick run through of this. This is a very short bite summary. If we're informing people about the solutions that have been generated, we're telling you our process. We're being open about what our process was and how we came to decisions and what the decision was. We're simply telling you that, so we're keeping you informed. The next step up, which is consultation, is that I might talk to you a little bit about the analysis and the solutions that we've generated, and I'll get your feedback about those, what you think about those and what could be maybe different or done differently. And I'll take your feedback on board, but I'll still be involved, I guess, hold the control of making the decision about what is the final solution and what we're doing. I'll tell you how your feedback informed that, but you can see how it's still a little bit kept away from the individuals who should be have more power in that process. Sitting in the middle there is where we start to involve people a lot more through the process. So people are talking to us about their experience, they're talking to us about what they think might be, and we talk about our decision making with them and our thinking through the process. And those types of discussions are a little bit more reflected in the solutions that are generated. So that feedback loop happens a little bit earlier and could influence the solutions, but still I'm holding the decisions about the solutions quite tight to the research team or to the organisation. We'll tell you, well, people were involved and this is what was ultimately decided and how they were involved and how we led to that decision and how they influenced that, but still I'm kind of holding the decision with me. Collaborate is that next step up where we're wanting people are very much involved in each of the steps. They're kind of helping to hopefully even at some stage identify what the issue is that we need to investigate, although that often still sometimes happens away from the groups and the communities. People will talk to us about their experience, what they recommend. They're involved in solution generation and certainly involved in working towards that end point. And we involve their advice and their recommendations to the maximum extent. But there's still that little step where the final decision making might sit with another group of people. And then empower is that absolute where decision making sits with the group that's of focus. So they're involved in all the steps and really they're the ones that say, these are the final decisions, this is what we need to move forward with. So it helps you to see, and we talk about this in terms of these are all elements of partnering with people in what we're doing, but you can see how the level of partnership changes all the way through. And it's really important that we're aware of that and we're thinking about that when we're making decisions about the research we're going to be doing and how we approach that. So in the AT Solutions for Queensland project, we had 4 action cycles that I'm going to really not talk about the cycles themselves, but how people were involved. So you can see the first 2 there were around the project, the needs assessment that was conducted, the preparation and the enacting of that. The 3rd cycle was the final piece of that big piece of work where we all came together to generate, prioritise and finalise solutions. And there was subsequent one where those solutions were then worked on further to drive the next piece of work. So in the first 2 steps, first 2 action cycles, we worked with what we referred to as a stakeholder group. And this included representatives of people who were AT users, expert AT advisors and specialists from around Queensland and Australia, key agencies and schemes who were involved in the sector, so representation from there, as well as other key organisations that were really invested and interested in ensuring that we were getting a true representation of what was happening in the sector around assistive technology so that we could really inform and come up with appropriate solutions. So we met on a bi-monthly basis with this group as a research team, and the first cycle was around the kind of development and finessing of the studies themselves and the data collection. We kind of brought ideas to the group that were then discussed and finessed and finalised, either in those discussions or by some email feedback after that. And then certainly on an ongoing basis, as the studies were underway, as we were meeting bi-monthly, we were updating the group on where we're up to, what was happening, but also the issues we were having, the findings that were emerging, and talking to them about that. And they certainly led to some changes along the way in terms of how the project occurred. One of the significant ones being that we introduced collection of information from suppliers of assistive technology, which was not there. So there was certainly input from this group at this stage, but it probably sat more down at the lower levels of involving, and perhaps as we got towards the latter stages to collaborate, where people were very much key to the decisions and informing some of the key decisions towards what happened. The next cycle was where we all came together for a day, and people were separated into 4 groups, and the groups were represented. Each group had representation from kind of all the main stakeholders there. And the morning session was, again, we were giving more information of the research findings, allowing more in-depth discussions at the tables and in the groups and as a larger group. And through this, people were starting, as a group, we were starting to identify what were the key issues that we needed to really generate solutions for, and what might some of those solutions be. So we were really at this stage working at that level of collaborate. In the afternoon session, those 4 groups were given the task of, sorry, there's a delay again. There it is, of working within their group in round 1 to start to generate solutions. What do they think is needed to address some of the issues, all the issues that we identified? We then, out of the 4 groups, we brought 2 groups together to form 1 group. So we went from 4 groups to 2 groups, and each group shared their solutions, their prioritization, and then kind of redid the list of what they thought was needed and what were the most important ones. And then at the end of the day, we came together as a larger group to discuss everything that had been generated and prioritize a final list. Our role as a research team in there were really very much as facilitators. We were not driving what was happening, and we really left the decision making and the final list with our stakeholder group. So very much at this point, we were working at that level of empower. Moving on from that, the next steps in action cycle 4, we took that priority list and met specifically with our AT users, so the end users, one-on-one or together with them to say, okay, these were the final outcomes. What are our next steps? Because there were 10 that were generated, there were a lot. This is the priority. What could this look like? What could we do next to make this work? And this was a great action cycle because these individuals were also directing us to, well, you need to go talk to these people over here and gather more information and bring that back to us and share that with us so that we can keep advising you and helping to make decisions. So again, when we think about that, we were really working at that level of collaborate through to empower, and certainly the outcome of this for the next steps was very much driven and decided on by that group. So for me to finish up, I think if you're wondering, I mean, certainly there was co-design an element of that in its form, but I also think through these participatory approaches and principles, because they sit within when we're doing co-design, the things that I guess I wanted to highlight and point out for them is that relationships always come first and research second when you're working in this way. It's really important as the organisation or the researchers that we're very aware of our own positionality, potential bias, where there is power imbalance between us and others or within the group, and that we work very hard to ensure that there is power sharing, equal voices, and certainly part of that is establishing ways of working, a common understanding of the issue, and that you develop collaboratively ways of observing the issue, collaborative ways of how to analyse, If possible, we have people that the gold standard is to also conduct the analysis together, but certainly that collaborative planning and that taking action and deciding on next steps, and that should be a shared decision. So that's some of the really good principles to keep in mind when you're doing this work. So I'm going to finish up now and get Mike to take control and hand over to him for the next presentation. This final slide is just some of the resources that I've talked about, and an editorial that's been written by another group of her team and myself around co-design and some of these principles. Thank you, Mike, and over to you.
Thanks, Louise. So I'm just going to see if I can get the slides to move forward. Here we go. Okay, so thank you, Louise. So my name's Mike, and I'm a research fellow at the Hopkins Centre. And so today I'm going to talk to you about our work with a research advisory group that helped us develop and explore a body of work around the use of the natural environment in rehabilitation. So sort of the key things I'll try and cover, or the points I'll try and get across, is essentially how the research advisory group has provided sort of solid co-design foundations for this work. And essentially, I'm going to sort of zoom out a bit and give a sort of a view of how co-design, or often in these cases, participatory research, might look across an entire sort of body of work. So an example of how co-design, again, or participatory research, it can inform projects in sort of interconnected, complicated, and often indirect ways. So it's a bit of a zoomed out version rather than the sort of the processes on a specific project. So, like I said, the research advisory group, this is kind of one of the key points I'm going to make, is that this was sort of the foundations of the co-design in this work. So we created this research advisory group with 3 people with lived experience of brain injury, who we already had a strong relationship with through the Hopkins Centre. And then we met with them to discuss sort of the research direction at the beginning of our funding round. We discussed with them the direction of the research for Programme 2 at the Hopkins Centre. We had a specific aim of looking at the concept of cognitive accessibility in the home environment. So we had an online session, and then we met in person and did some activities to establish this direction of research. However, and this is a note from the report on the workshops, the strongest theme that came through, the one that continued to return to, was the importance of access to nature throughout the rehabilitation process. So we didn't go in with that idea, but after the end, this was sort of the main theme that came through. So already sort of showing how consulting at the beginning of the research program was really important here. So as I've mentioned, the sort of example of or body of work I'll discuss to show the input from various partners and end users for this body of work is the nature and impact on rehabilitation. And we've got sort of 3 main projects at the moment that have come from that. And we'll have a look at the overview and see how the input, depending on context and resources and different partners and researchers at the time, changes how the input at different parts of this body of work looks. So it's also worth noting, so now I'm going to build, hopefully, to take confusion out of co-design like we're meant to here, build a little journey through. So we've got the research advisory group workshops leading towards this idea that there should be maybe a body of work on nature and the impact on rehabilitation. Worth adding here that my background is in nature and the impact on young people, so I had an interest in nature. However, I wasn't at these workshops, so I didn't have a chance to influence the outcome to be something I was interested in. Surely I would have, but I wasn't there. So it's all sort of separate at the moment to a degree. Okay, so like I said, 3 main projects have come from those workshops then. So the feedback that we received during the workshop led us to look at the literature, so looking at a review. And so we decided to complete a mapping review, where we'd look at nature at various distances and its impact on each journey of rehabilitation. So we created some research questions and then started that process. But then we went back to the research advisory group and we met with them individually and this clarified that the approach that we were taking, which was looking at time since injury and looking at distance from injury in sort of a linear fashion, was not the best approach and didn't really represent their experiences. So it led us to look more generally at the use of nature exposure or intervention in rehabilitation. So if the slide moves on, which it will. So essentially, we changed this from a mapping review to conducting a systematic scoping review. So it's a really good example of, I guess, check and check again, but how we started off with the research advisory group providing us with this idea of nature and rehab. We went away and started work, and if we hadn't checked back in, we would have gone off in the wrong direction. So checking back in, having that research advisory group as a sort of foundation for our co-design, participatory research success really helps send us on the right track. So you can see the neat journey here to take the confusion out of co-design. Perhaps we had the advisory group leading to that body of work, and then the advisory group again to keep us on that right track. So the next body of work is nature in the inpatient rehab, and this has two sort of projects. The top one, virtual access to nature, and the bottom one there says green neurorehabilitation. That's essentially real nature in inpatient rehab. And these also had input from clinicians. So we had the research advisory group sort of indirectly leading towards this work because they were talking about nature and in all aspects of rehab. We also did clinician workshops, and we have a really strong relationship with the clinicians. And as Louise mentioned, and it's another point I want to make here, is those strong relationships led sort of to these informal chats as well, where we got onto nature. And then with the virtual access, it also came from a patient feedback from a previous non-nature VR project, and we then have a consumer expert who's on this team with prior experience in this type of work. So I guess it's sort of starting to show like we're taking the confusion out, but it's complex. It's not just there's lots of input coming from different areas. We have the research advisory group, we got the clinicians, some random feedback from previous projects completely unrelated to nature, and then our relationships with individual members. So you can see the neat little journey here. Nature and inpatient rehab leading to those two projects. So we've got the review, the nature and inpatient rehab. We've got then the virtual access to nature led to a seed grant, which we've completed, and a submitted Metro South Health grant. So the final project that's come from those initial workshops was National Park Accessibility. This actually came from a tender that came out from Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. And so we put in a bid, and we're hoping to start work around this national park accessibility. So we can see sort of the final map here of, it looks like a really simple process going from the research advisory group through to the main body of work and then the different projects. But I'm going to do the opposite of what this is called now and try and sort of put the confusion back into co-design here. I'm going to try and write on it. Hold on, sorry. I knew how to do this a second ago, but now I don't. Okay, I don't know what's because that's anyway. What I was going to do was get a red pen and draw all over this diagram to show how confusing it is, but the option to do that is in a different place from when I'm not on presenter view, so won't do that, but I'll talk it through. So we have essentially this my background in nature creates a lot of the confusion that we're going to put back into this diagram. So we had the research advisory group talk about the workshops, talk about nature, and then essentially it was my background in nature and that research that led us on the wrong track with that rehabilitation journey question. And if we hadn't gone back to the research advisory group there, we would have gone off on a whole different direction, which would have been not representative of what the work that needed to be done. And then if we move to the virtual access to nature, well, I said I wasn't in the initial workshops that led to nature and rehabilitation work. That's because I was already in a meeting about virtual access to nature because of these clinician workshops. And there was, it turns out, a prior project looking at this that the consumer expert who we included was on that team. So we have essentially lots of different factors coming into to suggest we should do this work. And the consumer expert came from the research advisory group. And then we had the seed grant we completed. There was very little time to go from the seed grant to the Metro South Health grant. So we didn't get a chance to go back to the research advisory group. So in many ways, that transition wasn't your gold standard, what you'd like with co-design, but due to resources and time. So when you're looking at a big body of work, there's opportunities that come up where we included our consumer experts, we had our clinicians, we've sort of got the research advisory group who gave us those foundations of this work we should cover. But it's not always easy to do exactly what you need to do to keep going and progress that stuff. And then we go down to the national park accessibility. That didn't come from the research advisory group, but sort of indirectly it did, because we would not have likely not have followed this opportunity had we not had these initial workshops. So there's lots of different inputs, lots of different partners, and lots of different opportunities that come around from having these sort of solid foundations of a research advisory group. And then we didn't actually get that tender because we didn't want to. We were very expensive because we wanted to include people in our methods, people with lived experience and partners, and that made us very expensive. So we didn't actually get it. So now we've partnered with Cubulus on the Metro South Health grant. It's kind of changes this to a virtual access to local national parks, and then hopefully these projects that are going will sort of feed in and support more work here. So as far as taking the confusion out, if you look at how a project might progress or a body of work might progress, there's lots of different factors that come into account as to what work you will do and how you will progress it, whereas each individual project might have its own sort of co-design plan. So essentially, co-design doesn't always play out exactly as planned, and processes for specific projects are really important. But what's really important on a zoomed out sort of larger scale is strong relationships with partners. Louise had relationships first, research second. And then that research advisory group who can guide the direction and you can go back to help keep on, making sure you're on the right track. So that's the clean version. So when it was drawn all over, I could claim that I did take the confusion out of co-design, even after I put it back in. So key takeaways, essentially, the journey of co-design may not fit an exact model or process when you zoom out and look at a body of work. We learned that the journey of realization not linear for our review, and the journey of co-design might not be either. The extent of co-design in this work is not always how we would like, looking at the Metro South Health review, but we had the research advisory group, we had our partners and our clinician partners, so we've got a lot of input to show that, to show us that it's the right way, but it wasn't always possible because of timeframes and resources to do it exactly how we want. In terms of that tender, we were too expensive. If you can't get the appropriate input, it might not be necessary to progress that body of work, and you need to come back to it later once you've developed the ability to do it properly. And again, the research advisory group provided those foundations. So sorry about the pen not working to bring the confusion in, but I will hand over to Kelly now, who will talk about a different project.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I am here today to discuss our experiences with co-design relating to the BioSpine project. I'm presenting on behalf of my research team, which includes Dr. Camilla Schroeder and Dr. Jessie Mitchell. Oh, sorry. In Hollywood, a meet cute is defined as an amusing or charming first encounter between two main characters in a movie. Our story, instead of being Harry met Sally, begins when Dinesh Palapana, our first quadriplegic doctor, met Claudio Pizzolotto, who is a computational neuromusculoskeletal biomechanist. This chance encounter, when they met in the elevator of the building that they both lived in, led to the dream of improving motor, sensory, and autonomic function for individuals with spinal cord injury. Oh. Sorry, I am having some difficulties. Okay. Through multiple feats of engineering, BioSpine was born. It became something real. BioSpine is a system that combines multiple technologies to optimize the outcomes of and participants' engagement in assistive cycling combined with FES. Oh, God, I am having a shocking time with my slide transitions. That's okay. Okay. However, creation is not enough. The BioSpine team was desperate to avoid the Valley of Death. The Valley of Death is a stage in the research and development process where the technology reaches kind of a proof of concept phase. So it works in a controlled laboratory setting, but it requires significant development to be optimized to be implemented in real life settings. If you find yourself at the brink of the Valley of Death too late in the development process, or you identify challenges that are too insurmountable to overcome, your technology falls into the Valley of Death. It never leaves the lab. Often this process is completed after the fact. So people start to navigate these challenges once they've developed a prototype, once they've established the efficacy of the prototype, but it's too late. The central component of the BioSpine project is the co-design process, where we're aiming to identify and resolve issues before we stand at the edge of the Valley of Death. Enter the three stooges, Camilla, Jesse, and I, who are responsible for the co-design and translation of the BioSpine technology. If we deconstruct BioSpine into a sum of its parts, the motorized ergometry and the FES is relatively accepted. It's quite an established part of rehabilitation in spinal cord injury. If we look at the virtual reality, it's used, maybe not to the best of its potential. It's still seen as relatively experimental, but it's accepted. The pain points for the BioSpine project, however, are the brain-computer interface, the digital twin, in specifically the computational modeling and how that is integrated into the system, and the EEG. So when we had a look at BioSpine 1.0, our activities were divided into two parts: a development phase and an evaluation phase. Our philosophy of co-design is to implement it early and to implement it frequently. So the majority of our activities were in the development phase. The first thing we did was we identified who our stakeholders were. So we started to think about the groups of people who were going to influence the uptake of the BioSpine technology into clinical practice. So we identified individuals with lived experience of spinal cord injury and their caregivers, allied health professionals, medical professionals, individuals who work in the fields of insurance, policy, engineering, and neuroscience. They were our target groups for interaction with during the co-design process. The first thing we did is we established a translation steering committee. So we found representatives from each of these 7 groups and met with them on a quarterly basis. The idea behind this steering committee was to, in some way, shape, or form, co-design the co-design activities that were going to be implemented in the BioSpine project. We also conducted a symposium where we brought representatives from these 7 stakeholder groups on campus to Griffith University, and we had some presentations in relation to the current rehabilitation methods in spinal cord injury. We showed a prototype of the BioSpine project, and we also talked about our co-design methods. We then split these attendees into smaller multiple stakeholder groups where we conducted focus groups, where we tried to gain an understanding of what are some of the factors that were going to either restrict or promote the implementation of this technology in practice. However, prior to getting people to give up all of their time to come onto campus, we needed to make sure that if they were going to come here, that everything that we gave them was highly relevant. So we conducted a survey ahead of time, where we aim to establish the importance, roles, benefits, and barriers of technology in rehabilitation. Again, we targeted the 7 stakeholder groups and we received 100 responses. In the evaluation phase, we conducted 2 key research methods. The first of which is a think aloud method. This is where we got 5 individuals with lived experience of spinal cord injury and who have also engaged with FES-assisted cycling into the BioSpine lab to engage with the system. It's important to note that these individuals were not trial participants at the time that this research methodology was put in place. So we got them to engage with 1 full session with the BioSpine technology and asked them to verbalize their thoughts, their experiences while engaging with the system. We also conducted a semi-structured interview at the end to get more data about the utility and the acceptability of the system. And then finally, we did post-trial interviews with the BioSpine participants who were in the clinical trial. So we conducted 30-minute interviews with them to talk about their understanding of the technology, what they perceived it did, what their expectations were entering into the trial, whether those expectations were met, the advantages and disadvantages of engaging in the system, if there are any design modifications that they would suggest, and also some information about the acceptability of the intervention protocol. So the number of sessions, the timing of sessions, the frequency of the sessions. There were relative advantages and disadvantages of each of these methods. So the steering committee is a really great way of having regular touch points throughout a design and evaluation process with a group of stakeholders who are ultimately going to influence its uptake. It allows you to recruit across those multiple stakeholder groups as well. The disadvantages of a steering committee really relate to continuity and scheduling. So how can you keep people engaged in a process over a long period of time and juggle everybody's competing priorities? This was particularly relevant when we looked at the division between individuals with lived experience of spinal cord injury and the times that they would prefer the sessions to be versus individuals like who are working in policy or insurance, for example. Additionally, with a steering committee, one of the challenges that you face is parity in regards to making sure that everybody has that equal representation and that equal voice, irrespective of the topic that is being talked about. And that oftentimes limits the size of the team that you can recruit, because in order to get everybody's viewpoints heard, you need to almost have like quite a smaller team. The survey was great. It overcame that team size barrier because it allowed us to have that large distribution across the multiple stakeholder groups. We were able to gain qualitative and quantitative data, and we didn't use, but you can use validated measures, which allow you to compare and contrast between different technology projects. The difficulty with the survey, though, is the answer that you're given is the answer that you've got. So it's very difficult to understand or apply value or to expand upon a participant's response. So oftentimes your analysis is a bit limited because you can only evaluate what you read rather than adding value or applying constructs. The symposium allowed us to apply value and to expand upon the different elements and the different responses of participants, because we were able to do these in-depth, semi-structured discussions. We were able to break off into multiple stakeholder groups, which was great. The symposium, though, is resource intensive. And when you are doing things like focus groups, you do sometimes need specialized training in skills like nominal group technique or qualitative analysis, which can sometimes restrict their uptake. The Think Aloud protocol allowed us to gain really specific feedback regarding the design and development considerations for the BioSpine technology. We combined it with a semi-structured interview, as I indicated before, and that allowed us to get some information about acceptability and utility. Again, these can be really resource intensive because you need to replicate the experience of engaging with the technology. So you need clinician time. In addition to that, because people are contributing their lived experience, it was very, very important to us that we appropriately compensated them for their time and also engaged in funding their travel as well. They can be used in combination with interviews and surveys, but that does increase the resource intensiveness of it, and it also increases participant burden. So you need to kind of think about that when you're designing your protocol. When I read the literature relating to co-design, rightly or wrongly, post-trial interviews seem to be one of the methods that's used the most. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it because it gains a lot of experiential data. These are the people who have engaged with this system to the highest level, so they have the best understanding of how it works. You can combine them with other research methods and you can compare and contrast your results as well. However, one of the biggest drawbacks of post-trial interviews is it really limits the shared decision-making, which I think is a fundamental component of the BioSpine process, the co-design process. You need to be able to give people that shared decision-making in the design, not just the end stakes of the technology. It also results in you identifying a significant number of issues after a considerable design process has been undertaken. So you find yourself on the edge of the valley of death. It should be noticed that we had, one of the challenges that we faced was being really respectful of the individuals with lived experience of spinal cord injury and their capacity to contribute to our research methods. We had more success recruiting individuals with lived experience in the non-contact methods like the survey or instances of reduced contact. So for example, the Think Aloud protocol or where they were already participating in a trial, so obviously had the capacity to contribute to an additional session. If we think about the methods that we have implemented on a continuum, where we have the ability to generate data regarding the needs of the stakeholders versus data in relation to the design of the technology, the use of our steering committee, symposium, and surveys, in our experience, gave us the most data in relation to the needs, wants, desires of the participants. They were a really great way of generating that data. The interviews and the think aloud methods gave us really nuanced data in relation to the design specifications. It was able to put the information relating to needs and wants in context of the technology developed. It should be noted that surveys can actually be used to evaluate design. We just didn't use them in BioSpine 1.0. What we're looking for, however, is the holy grail. We are looking for that method that allows us to do both. And in my humble opinion, I don't think it exists. And I think that's why co-design has to be iterative and why there has to be different methodologies that need to be included when you're thinking about co-designing something with stakeholders. And no one method is going to be superior to the others. It really relates on the context of the technology and the stakeholder groups that you're engaging with. Like all good movie franchises, we were granted a sequel, so we have BioSpine 2.0. So we are engaging in some different co-design methods in this phase of the project. We're doing some workshops with our individuals with lived experience of spinal cord injury who have previously participated in the BioSpine trial, and we're directly linking them with the design and development team to discuss and verify and contribute to ongoing design plans for BioSpine 2.0. We have more regular touch points throughout our trial period. So we are working with the person after their first session with the BCI and VR components of the system, after their first session with the full system, midway through the trial, and at the end of the trial. We're expanding our Think Aloud protocol to include clinicians and the design and development team members, so giving them experiences with the system. And not to mix movie franchises, but we're trying to navigate the final frontier of how we co-design knowledge translation or turn our co-design into knowledge translation to jump over that valley. Like most individuals who are here today, we are very fortunate to have the support of the Motor Accident Insurance Commission. This is twofold for our project because our project is a joint project of BioSpine and the Hopkins Centre, both of which who receive funding from the Motor Accident Insurance Commission. So we're very grateful for that support. That's it from me. So I'm going to hand back over to Louise.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mike and Kelly, for your presentations there today. We are moving into the panel session. I'm moving to the side because Hannah, who's one of our panel members, has been patiently sitting in the office here with me, so she's going to wheel on in. So we are absolutely moving into the panel discussion. I can see there's been a question/comment there from Tim already. That's a classic seminar tactic of is this a question, is it a comment? But I think you making a great comment there, Tim, which we'll come back to. But I would like to welcome both Hannah Simmons and Catherine Cave, who are going to talk to us a little bit today about their experiences in being involved with the Hopkins Centre and any other organisations in participatory work that may or may not have been called co-design. So I might get you each to just introduce yourselves, if you don't mind, and a little bit about yourself. We might go to you first, Hannah, if that's okay.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Simmons. So I am a lived experience researcher. I work with the Hopkins Centre. The way I got involved was through being originally a participant in research, and then I slowly became kind of involved in a couple of research projects and then have worked more collaboratively on other projects, and I'm now currently doing a PhD. I have a C7 spinal cord injury. That's my disability background.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And Catherine, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and a little bit about how you ended up in this space, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Louise. So I'm a physio over at the PA hospital, working predominantly in the brain injury rehab service. number of years experience in the hypertonicity clinic in the BERS service, where I've been privileged to be a clinical research officer for that team, involving some sort of bigger international studies, being sort of site coordinator, and then thankfully achieving a Hopkins Centre grant back in 2018 to look at our own service delivery and how it was perhaps different to what we were hearing about from outside of Australia. And more recently, been fortunate to engage with the Hopkins Centre projects on a number of different projects with a number of different researchers, all of who've taught me different skills and different ways of looking at the problems that they're unraveling for the positive, most definitely.
Great, thank you. I was wondering if I guess if people are attending today and they're kind of thinking if this is something they would like to get involved with, when you did start getting involved in research and working with researchers, what were the things that were helpful in terms of you understanding what was happening and how to be involved, as well as what were potentially unhelpful things? What do you think we should know?
Well, I kind of fell into this by accident, to be honest. I started off as a participant in research, and then I guess I just began talking to some of the researchers involved with that and let them know about my interest with helping people with disabilities. And then I kind of just got in contact with the Hopkins Centre through them and managed to get a little bit of collaborative work with them. So I think I was kind of just lucky, but I think that if you wanted to search for it, there's definitely people you can reach out to who have a lot of experience in this field, or even other researchers with lived experience who can help guide you, because I've even spoken, since becoming a part of this, to many other researchers with lived experience who have been really helpful in telling me what's the best way to go about things, or maybe who else I can reach out to for any advice. So yeah.
Great, thanks. And Catherine, what about for you?
Certainly reflecting back on the experiences I've had through the Hopkins Centre, I think, as you mentioned in the first presentation, that the relationship building is really critical to getting a successful outcome from research, and particularly into that translation flow. I think it's very easy for researchers to perhaps approach sort of management level or more senior levels of teams in public hospitals and engaging them, but they're not necessarily the best people to be talking to about what's happening on the ground level, what the work environments and time pressures are like, and what the real engagement is with our patients that we work with on a daily basis. So I think probably my thoughts in terms of what we could be doing better is just to make sure we're networking and connecting with the right people in the right place at the right time. I think if you get that right and you can build that level of trust and awareness of that situation and setting, you're off to a great start, and you'll have a better understanding of what the nature of the problems are in the real world. And then therefore you're going to be more successful in your outcomes.
Fantastic, thank you. And that's some great message for researchers there. What would you tell researchers, Hannah? What do you think they should know?
I guess, I don't know, to have open communication and be willing to learn from the people who have done it before, but also making sure that you have the confidence to ask the questions and be prepared. So we've got to kind of create that space, that relationship and space, so that you feel comfortable. Yeah, especially coming into this without a background in health research. It was pretty daunting to get to know, the experts in this area. And it definitely helps getting to know people and having those relationships build up.
I can see that there's a comment in the chat section from Christina. Thank you, Christina, who's saying, as someone with lived experience of brain injury, the advice is to prioritize face-to-face meetings. Building personal relationships in this way can make a significant difference in understanding and communication. Thank you, Christina. Yeah, that's a great message, and that's certainly something that comes through really strongly. I am very mindful of the time, so I might just come back up because I think there's the two comments that sit above kind of align. There's one comment there, or a question that's asking what's the difference and overlap of co-design and participatory action research? And I think that's a really good question. I might give a quick response and then throw to Mike, Kelly, or others and see if there's something they'd like to add. I think in its purest sense, co-design is often about designing a product, designing a something that comes out of it, whereas in the purest form, participatory action research can be about just understanding an issue more deeply from the perspective of the communities and the groups who are involved. But they absolutely come together. And I think that's really kind of one of the main points that we wanted to stress today, is that all of those wonderful principles that we have from participatory research, when you bring those into a co-design methodology or a framework, then you're really working kind of in that way that the Scandinavians wanted to work when they designed that computer for the workplace. It's very much everybody involved in designing the system that the workers are going to work with. Kelly, Mike, did you want to add anything to that? No?
I was just going to say it was a really great response. For me, I think the intention and the guiding principles are one of the most important parts of co-design, and I think that kind of speaks to Tim's question / comment. You know, we really struggle with that. Like, what is the difference between them, and when can you put your hand on your heart and say I'm co-designing versus I'm doing participatory research, and not discouraging people who are trying or attempting to do either of those. So for me, it's that collaborative, shared decision-making, shared power that really differentiates co-design.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Kelly, that's a great point. I think, as I kind of alluded to, if you're using that co-design toolkit, you can work through the steps, but if that true kind of collaboration, shared decision-making really isn't happening, then it's very difficult to truly say. You might be consulting with people. So I think that's the key, being really clear about what is that level of partnership and power sharing and how is that working. And I think I know that as a team, we often wonder about, and when we're reading papers even, we'll read things that say that they're co-design. And if we kind of put our lens of what we believe should be happening, if we put it through that lens, it can sometimes fall a little bit short. But I guess, as Kelly says, you know, we've all learnt this somewhere. We've all had to start somewhere. So it's really important to do that. And I think Christina's extended that beautifully. It's really important to understand your limitations. Mike really nicely talked about how, you know, we don't always get it right, and we learn from that as a team as well. There are lots of comments coming through, but I'm very aware that we're right on 1:28. I think, thank you, Angela, for your contributions, that we need to think about fatigue levels and abilities and allow that in terms of how we are designing. And I think that's where that kind of collaboratively deciding how you're going to meet and engage would help to inform that really well. Just before we finish off, Catherine, are there any final words, anything you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say before we end today?
There's probably one big one, and it's something that affects everyone, academics, researchers, clinicians, is that don't underestimate the time this takes. And also, when you're going for a grant application, consider the impact of the time on those people doing the contribution, the co-design, participants' time. Because there's a lot of clinicians out there that would be very willing and eager to contribute, but our passion lies with supporting the patients, and that our time will always go to them over research projects unless we're backfilled and supported in that way. So I guess don't underestimate the time that we're willing to invest, but we need that investment in the funding to support us to do that.
Excellent point. Thank you, Catherine. Anything you came here to say and haven't had a chance to say?
I just wanted to agree with the comment that was made about understanding your limitations. Like, obviously, as someone with a disability, and in a wheelchair, I suffer with like fatigue and things. So it's really important that I know that and can communicate it with whoever I'm working with. And it's also important that, you know, the definition of co-design allows for, you know, a little bit of wiggle room depending on, how I'm feeling in a day or how much I'm able to extend myself into this type of work.
Definitely. Right. I feel like, thank you so much to both of you. I feel like if we were at the Oscars, the music would be playing now and we would be marched off the stage. So I would like to very much thank Mike, Kelly, Catherine and Hannah for their time today and for their wonderful contributions. We really appreciate all of you who have joined us here today. I'm really sorry. I could see a hand up. I'm really sorry we're out of time, but feel free to contact us afterwards. But certainly, get in touch with the Hopkins Centre if you'd like to discuss anything any further. And keep your eye on our events page and your emails for our upcoming events. I know we've got quite a few coming up. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope that the rest of the week treats you well.